There we go. The sound thing that I always forget to turn on.
Oh, it's not powered from the camera?
No, it needs a. Yeah, that's really funny, isn't it? It's not
Yeah.
powered from the camera.
All right.
All right. Okay, I promised that I would finish up the internal and the veracity. So if you remember, we were looking at the veracity of text, and we had the three tests: the bibliographical, the internal, and the external tests. And you can go into huge detail about this. And when I've actually written a couple of papers, I've written a couple of things, and in the first part when I did Hebrews, the translation, I went into really huge detail about using these tests. But just so you remember, I'll just review a little bit. This is one of the three ways to know truth. There are three ways to know truth, and you should ask your children, did you learn the three ways to know truth when you were in school today? Because they should, right? And the one way is the legal historical method, is which the method they'll use to put you in jail if you are a criminal, or find you innocent if you are not a criminal, which is probably a positive thing to understand. But as I told you, when we look at anything, it doesn't matter if it's ancient documents or anything, when you look at testimony or witness or evidence, archaeological, books, anything, even the modern world, if you look at papers or at videos or whatever, you've got to have some means of determining whether they are accurate, right? Even now we know we have these deep fakes they talk about, right? So how do you know a deep fake isn't fake? And you can apply the same kind of process to those. So we're talking about ancient documents, and I think it's incorrect, but many times professors and professorettes, if you haven't noticed, they won't talk about the method or methodology, but you'll hear all this stuff about, how you can't trust an eyewitness, right? How you can't trust this, how you can't trust that. Well, where's your evidence? You show me the evidence, show me the money, right? In ancient documents, they are our evidence. And as you've seen, the documents in the New Testament pass the bibliographical tests, magnitudes better than anything else. So if you're going to discount the New Testament documents, you're going to have to throw out Caesar and Pliny and Augustus and all those guys, right? Up to the point where we have text, or printed text generally, or when we get out of what do we call the age of antiquity. So in any case, if you're not going to throw out all of ancient history, you're going to have to accept the New Testament documents. And that's what there are certain groups that do not want to do that. I read a paper in the Wall Street Journal, about how the liberals versus conservatives in the academia were equal back in the 60s. But over time, it was 5 to 1. Now it's 12 to 1. They're expected to be 15 to 1, soon. So when do you have academia where you never can find a conservative viewpoint ever? So everybody's Marxist, Leninist crazy heads, right, in academia. So that makes you want to think, well, I'll send my kids to Hillsdale, right, or to some place where they have rational thinking. But anyway, that's a free play. In any case, we have these three tests, and we've gotten to the internal tests. And I told you I had some information. The internal tests, if you look at any reputable evidentiary stuff, you may or may not find information on the bibliographical, but you always see internal and external with ancient documents. So I'll give you a warning. If you're reading about an ancient document, or if you're reading about the book of John, for example, you can go out on the internet, and if you start looking for sources or information, it's a very good academic paper because it will say the external proofs and the internal proofs. And it may even talk about the bibliographical proofs. Bibliographical proofs is not a new idea, but it's relative. It's not a new idea at all. In the past, the reason it wasn't a problem is because if everybody learns Greek and Latin, and I hand you, like for example, if I hand you a copy of Caesar or Pliny or any of those, right? And as a professor, I would say, okay, this copy of Pliny we got from St. James Library, la la la, right? And it was from a manuscript that was last copied in 1600. You'd have that information right ahead of you because that information is directly available to you, right? In the modern era, you're lucky to get a translation. Most kids in school and in college, very rarely do you even read translations. What do they teach? They teach Josephus. Trust me, here's what Josephus said. They rarely give you Josephus, which, I know I've got a copy of Josephus' Wars and the other one, Jewish History. And it's like this thick, really fine print and last printed back in 18 something or other, right? So they're still doing prints of that document. So just saying, in the past, people recognized the bibliographical because that was just part of the basics of their work. And they might even ask questions about it, right? Because in the subtext, like for example, how many of you guys have a minority text or a majority text New Testament? I got one. I usually carry it around. It's the Greek. And in the bottom of the majority text Greek, what does it say? There's like 20,000 documents, and they all have some textual differences, which we'll talk a little bit about. But it explains the textual differences. If you're a scholar of Greek, you know that, right? If you get the New King James, generally, or NIV or whatever text you get, you might be lucky if there's a little post note in the bottom that says, oh, this reads this in some, and this reads this in the other. Like, for example, the Mark text, right? Or not Mark, what about Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, right?
Where he's writing in the sand or the dirt.
Yeah.
That was added.
Well, it appears to be added because which one does it come from? We have no idea. It was variously added to different, Luke and John, and like, okay, where is this, And for example, the end of Mark, there are pieces of Mark that just appeared, a couple of them. And these aren't in the earliest documents. That's interesting. There's also some in John, too.
Mine at least said in the footnote that this was a late date edition or something, so at least called that out.
Right.
Didn't say necessarily where.
The big thing, too, is if you're reading your translation, right, or if you're reading your original Greek, you go, this Greek is a little different. Matter of fact, when we start looking at John, if you take your notes from Hebrew and you go, whoa, this guy is using different words. He's using different, he's not using different Greek, but he's using different words in a way that we didn't see in Hebrews. Hebrews is a more scholarly kind of Greek. John is still considered a pretty high-end Greek, but you go, whoa, he sure uses the I am forms. He was, much more than Mark, for example. We'll see that. Anyway, we got to the internal tests. So the internal tests, maybe I should go back a bit. Let's see. The internal tests are looking at the degree of the witness. They're looking at geographically, chronologically, are they cohesive? Are they coherent? Are they just crazy? I mean, in the ancient world, there's a lot of crazy. I'm not kidding. Maybe I'll give you some examples. I didn't grab the examples. I've got them in the stuff I teach, but generally we look. So we see the New Testament documents. We're going to look at John's primary source, geographically placed, chronologically placed, present, and I've got some evidence of that too in just this information. So in the internal tests, we're compared to other works in antiquity. This was kind of the conclusion. I was going to show you some evidence. The New Testament documents fulfill all the internal qualifications at least as well. Matter of fact, better. I think better. If you're a student of, let me see. let me see if I can pick one that you would have read. Most people read some of the Socratic dialogues. Socratic dialogues are pretty good. They're not easy to understand. You really, really have to dig into them because they're dialogues. They're kind of like, remember when you read Shakespeare and you go, boy, this is hard to understand. And then you go see a play, and if you actually have good people that know how to do the play, you go, wow, now I understand, right? Because it's dialogue. It's a play. The same thing's true of Socratic dialogues. If you just try to read them sitting at your desk, if you're not really, if you're not reading the squeaky voice here and the deep voice here and the different voices, you won't get the point of the dialogue, right? And your teacher never did that, usually. And the truth that you see the same thing in a lot of documents in antiquity. Either they're difficult to understand because you're not approaching them the way the ancient world would. Remember, did anybody read by themselves at their desk? No, everybody read aloud. Everybody did. And you read aloud because they were mnemonics and you had already memorized the text. It's pretty interesting. We talk about rereading books. Just think, if you owned, a book, approximate cost of a book in the ancient world, we're talking $20,000 to $50,000 a book. So you might own one if you're a wealthy person. So you've got that book memorized and you keep reading it and rereading it and rereading. And if you got a new book, your neighbor said, hey, could I loan you my book and my book slave, right? You go, I need the book slave. And you'd be like, oh, thank you, right? So in the ancient world, they were few and far between. But if you read them, and you know what I'm talking about, these ancient documents look really strange. So the New Testament documents are cohesive, comprehensible. And as a matter of fact, you can read them. I want to talk about that when we talk about literature of John. So based on the bibliographical and internal test, a work is always, you look at this, always historically given the benefit of the doubt. Do you know what I said? If a book passes bibliographical and internal, it's always given the benefit of the doubt. So, if I took the book of John, Gospel of John, and hand it to a history professor, what should that history professor do? They should say, this is, wow, better than Josephus. There's more copies. It's closer to the original. It's more direct. Josephus never saw half the stuff that he wrote about. It's always given the benefit of the doubt. So why don't we give the benefit of the doubt to the New Testament documents? That's interesting to me. Very interesting. You might say there's some prejudice maybe going on there. I'd say. So, based on the bibliographical internal test, historical claims of New Testament documents are assumed to be true. Every historian knows this. Every historian knows this because the documents pass the test. So anytime you hear a professor or professorette say, well, you can't trust the New Testament documents. You say, why? Well, it has miracles. Well, Caesar has miracles. Josephus has miracles. Every document in antiquity pretty much has miracles. Even Epictetus, what's his name? Marcus Aurelius has miracles. Huh? Anybody read about the Trojan Wars? There's miracles happening all over the place. Anybody read about the 300? What's the book by Theodocles? There's miracles happening left and right. And it's a historical document. Anybody read Herodotus? There's miracles everywhere. Why? If you have no idea what science is, everything is a miracle, right? Everything is a miracle if you're an animist. Animism, paganism, right? In animism, the world is run by spirits. So everything in the world is a miracle, period. I don't know. It cracks me up. People who have not read ancient documents or have no clue about ancient documents say stupid stuff all the time. But that's classic. You can see that. It cracks me up. So here's some internal stuff. F.F. Bruce, famous gospel apologist. It was not a friendly eyewitness as the early preachers had to reckon with. There were others less well-disposed who were also conversant with the main facts of the ministry and life and death of Christ. Disciples could not afford to risk inaccuracies, not to speak of willful manipulation of the facts, which would be at once exposed by those who would be only too glad, for the contradictions. On the contrary, one of the strong points of original apostolic teaching is a confident appeal to the knowledge of the hearers. They not only said, we were witnesses, but also you yourselves know. Right? Would you say that if you were telling lies? I mean, you'd be in real trouble, right? Even to the Greeks. Had there been any tendency to depart from the facts in any material respect, the possible pressure of hostile witnesses would have served as further corrective. Not only that, I'll probably get into it. We'll see if we can bring into some of that stuff. But in Talmudic sources, you see they actually made up some really cool stories about Jesus the sorcerer, about 200 years after his death, and how his mother was raped by a Roman centurion named so-and-so, and this and that and other thing. It was literally made up. Why? To disparage the truth of the stories. And you find it in Talmudic documents. You also find that Paul was unwritten out of Talmudic documents. He's called the one who shall not be named, kind of like Voldemort, right? So, but, it cracks you up. Here's old Luke. Luke is our historian. He says, I am not mad, Your Excellency, said Paul. What I'm saying is sober truth. The king is well versed in these matters. To them I can speak freely. I do not believe that he can be unaware of any of these facts, for this has been no hole and corner business. I've got some really cool ArchCode documents. So I've taught a little bit about it sometimes, but there are ArchCode documents in the Vatican. I don't know if you've read them. I've read them. Most of them are considered pseudographia, in other words, made up. But you don't know. Why do you not know? The Vatican's got like 3 or 4, maybe 1 copy of the whole thing, and they keep them. Since this Protestant minister came in and found them, basically copied them and published them back in the 1800s, they kind of disappeared-ish, but we know they're there, and the Vatican ain't saying they're gone, but they're well-known, pseudographia. But are they pseudographia? Well, we don't know. Remember I said you give the benefit of the doubt to the document until you can disprove it? Right? Just saying. Anyway, there's a lot of cool stuff. There is, for example, there's a bunch of letters from Pilate about Jesus in the pseudographia, or in the ArchCode documents. For internal tests in John. The author was a Jew. Quotes occasionally from the Hebrew text. We'll see that. Acquainted with the Jewish feasts. Remember I told you, in the Jerusalem Bible, the Jewish feasts are the primary outline for John, according to them. John was a very strong Jew and wrote his stuff based generally in Jewish feasts and festivals, which is interesting. Acquainted with Jewish festivals. Remember we said we want to be chronologically, geographically, time-placed. That's what this is. He's showing internal tests. He was acquainted with Jewish customs, such as arranging water pots and burial customs. The author was a Jew in Palestine. Remember we said the geography was important because he's acquainted with the topography. Knows Jacob as well as deep. It states that there is a descent from Canaan to Capernaum, distinguishes between Bethany and Bethany beyond the Jordan. This is important stuff. Why is that important stuff?
It shows familiarity with the area.
Well, the problem with ancient documents, remember the problem with ancient Greek documents? This is what I want to get to in this class. We may have to expand it to the next class, but the most important thing about Greek documents is they don't tell you everything that you want to know, right? They tell you what the author thinks is important for the logos to tell us, which we'll get into, the logical argument to the conclusion. That's not really what it is, but conclusion, okay? So that's what they want you to see. So is it important that Jacob's well is deep? No. In a lot of Jewish or a lot of Greek ancient documents, they just say Jacob's well. They assume that you would know it's deep, right? But when you have this kind of topographical information and you find it in an ancient document, this proves that the author was there, or at least familiar with the area, right? Which you don't find in a lot of ancient documents. Remember, space is sparse and every word is a lot of money. We're talking $20,000 to $50,000 documents here, right? So every word, every space, everything I write costs me big money. So do I put things that are not important to the text? No. So when you find these kind of things, these are really important textual identifiers. Historians are supposed to know this. The author was an eyewitness of what he wrote. He stated that he had beheld Christ's glory using a verb with which the New Testament Greek always bears the meaning of at least physical examination. He has incidental comments about his being there. Jesus slipped out at night, la la la, at the 6th hour. The author wrote as an apostle. Intimate knowledge of what happened among the disciples, although apostle is a funny word to use, that's okay. The author was the Apostle John, exact in mentioning names of individuals, yet omits John unless the John mention of John the Baptist is John, implies that to show the narrative another name must be given him, such as beloved disciple. This does it. I borrowed this from textual information for internal proof text from another document. I want to mention this to you. You know, or you may not know, that in ancient documents, the authors rarely talked about themselves. It was considered to be
Rude.
yeah, boastful and incorrect use. Remember, the Greeks don't even like to say I am, right? So if you say I was, I am, I are, right? If you say that you are there, then you are that is just like kind of an anti-ancient world, ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew, right? Because I am is Jehovah. So you can see that there would be a huge problem with mentioning who you are, your name. And so we don't see it. Even Luke, Luke says who he is, but he's a historian writing like Herodotus, right? So he wanted to give a key that this is who I are. You know, I am this person writing this. But, you know, I think that's an important point, but it's not really mentioned by the text. Maybe the guy wasn't really familiar with some of the other ancient parts. Finally, or next, those are the internal proofs. Then we have external proofs. What we do with the external proof is we compare other works. We use the same region, same time period, and archaeology can be used to do this. This was the Tübingen School problem. Remember I told you, the Tübingen School, when it started up, at the time it was the turn of the, near the 20th century, or near the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, the 1800s. And so the problem they had when archaeology was a nascent science is they didn't have a lot of archaeology, right? I mean, they expected to go out and start digging, and right, they're going to dig and they're going to find stuff. And what did they find? It was a lot of hard work, is what they found. Okay, picture this, right? I'm a Victorian archaeologist. Do I dig?
No,
You hire somebody.
your workers.
Right, I hired somebody to dig. Okay, so how are they digging? Pitch, axe, you know, right? And so all those, like, okay, I was looking for jars, you know, of clay. Oh. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You know, maybe they'll find a piece of metal. Probably not. Remember, what kind of metal might you find? Well, and when they find it, they find gold and silver. What happens to the metal?
In the pocket.
I wrote about this in one of my books that wasn't published, but one of the biggest scourges of the Victorian eras and even later eras, archaeology was pilfering. They basically had to, they found out, it wasn't enough to hire guys to dig, they had to hire armed guards. And how do we do digs today? Well, we steal interns that don't pay any money. They pay you, by the way, to go, and they're trained, right? Kids who don't know any better, and they're doing free digging for you, right? And what do? They dig with toothbrushes and with like their hands, right? Basically to protect all these, you know, very delicate things from ancient history. So do you wonder why they didn't find things? Right? The only thing they're going to find is stuff you can't break or steal. So, whatever. I think it's kind of funny.
When did they find the Dead Sea Scrolls? Was that in the 1920s?
1940s.
1940s.
40s.
Yeah.
So it was a long, long time before they found a lot of manuscript kind of evidence, right?
No, Dead Sea Scrolls basically gave us great manuscript evidence for the Old Testament, Torah, but not the New Testament.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, the Hammurabi, not Hammurabi, get me on a Hammurabi. What's the other one? The famous other find, the Gnostic find. Starts from the ancient thing. There's a great find, and I've got a Naharabi. No. Starts with an N. I think it starts with an N. There's a bunch of documents that have been found. What's interesting in Christianity is we have rarely found, or almost zero found, Gnostic documents with Christian documents. But the Gnostics, we found a lot of Gnostics. After what? Okay, look, ancient literature is sometimes crazy literature, and a lot of Gnostic documents are crazy literature. And you even read them and you go, huh? You know, kind of like Zoroastrianism, huh? And so, you know, a lot of the crazy stuff never got redone. It never got reproduced. There's a good reason for it, because it's crazy stuff. So when we find it, you know, in scroll packages, maybe wrapped up like the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? And it's not Hammurabi. It's that other huge find in Egypt where they found a lot of the Gnostic documents and whatever. But they were, you know, like, for example, Gospel of Thomas came out of that bunch of stuff. And Gospel of Judas, I think, came out of it too. In any case, the other documents, we have manuscripts and we have documents that have been saved and kept by people forever and ever and ever, right? And some we have discovered, some of the papyrus stuff in other things, but mostly we find them in libraries. Or some guy, like, you know, some knight of the realm, knight of, you know, whatever, you know, like what's the name? Jagger's a knight, right? The guys who are knighted by the queen, some guy has a piece of papyrus that he's had for 100 years, you know, or his family's had 100 years, and they've got it under glass in his library. And some guy goes and says, can you read this? No, I can't read it, you know. He says, well, you understand what this is like part of Mark. And so they discover things even today because people have parts and pieces, you know, maybe even out in the store box, you know, wrapped up or something that could be really bad. But that's where they find things. They found that one piece of the Didache. The Didache was originally found, somebody was just going through textual manuscripts in a one of the Italian convents, right? Going through the library, the convent, and found, wow, this looks really old. It's like flaking and coming apart. And it's like, maybe we should like protect this. And so it's a copy of the Didache, and they found like 5 of them since then. So, wow, right?
Nag Hammadi?
Nag Hammadi, that's right. The Nag Hammadi. So, for external tests, we could compare the works of the New Testament to each other. Because each one meets the internal test, right? They also meet the external test in every respect. But we don't have to. We don't have to compare. And I'll bring up these documents. We have other histories, though not as completely reliable as the New Testament. Right? Here's a problem we got. So if for example, you hear this all the time from the professors and professorettes. They go, oh, well, you know, even if there are documents like John, what can I compare them to? Like Josephus, Eusebius, Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Polycarp. Here's Josephus. Why do they not want you to use Eusebius, Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Polycarp? Well, they are better. You're right on. They are really good documents in antiquity. But the problem is they're Christians. The presumption is that if you're a Christian witness, then what are you going to do?
You're in on it.
You're in on the message. You're going to lie about it. You say, well, yeah, right? It's like, wait a second. So, you know, how many Christian witnesses are to the Muslim events? Or how many non-Christian witnesses are to the winds of the War of the Roses or the 100 Years' War, right? Who are you going to trust? It's like, what, they can only be non-Christian? That's crap. That's like, you're whack, man. But anyway, that's why they don't see the external authenticity is attested to by all these. I've got some evidence and some information here. I'll get to it eventually. Josephus wrote. Now, this one they do not like about Josephus. They say this was added, obviously added, right, by those dastardly Christians. Now, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if you be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drove him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him in the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these, and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Whoa, okay. That's pretty cool. What do the professors and professorettes say about this quote from Josephus? Who was copying the manuscripts at the time? Those dastardly Christians were. And they added that in, and they added in, there's a couple of other ones to it about Jesus. Other Jewish accounts not only acknowledge the existence of the birth of the Jews, but actually attempt to discount the deity. So, okay, so if I acknowledge him, like for example, Jesus is a sorcerer, right? And he had gone to Egypt. That's what it says in the Egyptian, the Talmudic source from Alexandria. It said Jesus went to Egypt, and he was a sorcerer in Egypt for a while, and they went back to Jerusalem. And he performed miracles. All right, what did I just do? And this is from the 2nd century. So I just proved it. I proved the point, okay? And the fact that his mother Mary was raped by a Roman centurion and had a baby out of wedlock, or that Joseph accepted. What does that prove? There's a question about it, the fact of his father, right? Okay, so you can't make this up, okay? If you're trying to make this up, you'd be writing the same thing, right? So I'm like, that acknowledges, by attempting to disparage the person of Jesus, these accounts acknowledge the situation and facts from the life of Christ and supply us greater proof. I love it. Go ahead. Throw some of those disparaging things. It cracks me up. Early is Irenaeus. Okay, Irenaeus one of early. And see, here's the problem. Most of us don't know who these guys are, where these guys are in history, right? Because one, we don't teach the Apostolic Fathers, which really blows me away. You have to go to college or to some special university to get it. But Irenaeus, early as Irenaeus, Eusebius reports Irenaeus received the information about the authenticity of John from Polycarp, who received it from the apostles directly. Irenaeus received the information as a child. And, okay, this is what some historians say. He may have been mistaken as to which John wrote the gospel. All the writers after Irenaeus do not question the authorship. Criticism must give way to criticism must give way to historical probability. Okay, what about Buddha? Who wrote Buddha? Nobody knows. The earliest documents are 100 years after he's dead. 100 years after he's dead. So nobody who knew Buddha wrote about Buddha. Okay? Nobody even heard Buddha wrote about Buddha. How do you know? Right? Here you got Irenaeus, who says when he was a child, he basically saw the Gospel of John from the hand of John. But he may have been mistaken about whether it was John the Gospel writer or John the other writer, which they were maybe the same guy. Well, modern scholarship says they weren't, but, there's a problem with modern scholarship, right? The Apostolic Fathers who state about the Gospel of John, Tertullian, Clement of Alexander, Origen, and more. The Maturinian canon, okay, when I say the Maturinian canon, every one of you guys should go, your eyes should go. The Maturinian canon is really important. It's a Gnostic document. Do you know that? Maturian, what would they call themselves? Maturians, whatever. They were a Gnostic movement in Christianity that were reputed, but guess what they used? Almost all the Christian documents, the ones they didn't like, they threw them out. They said, we don't like these Christian documents because they don't, the Maturians were Arian. Basically, they did not believe that Christ was God, and they believed they were Gnostic. You know what Gnostic means? Gnostic, well, I haven't talked much about it in this class yet. But Gnosticism means you believe that knowledge leads to salvation. And so the Maturians were looking at Gnosticism. The Maturian canon, though, was one of the first canons of the New Testament documents, the list of what you should read. Okay? So when Marcion, who was the guy, wrote the canon, he suggests that John was given the commission to write a gospel after Andrew received a vision. Okay, this is a big deal because you're the basically enemies of Christianity, the enemies of Nicene Christianity, are what? Affirming the Gospel of John. And they didn't like John. They were Lukean guys. They liked Luke because they liked Satan's Gospels. So the Maturians were really into Luke. The anti-Marcionite prologue affirms Johnian authorship. That's like your enemy saying, I agree, right? It's pretty funny. There are all kinds of stuff that you would learn. If we were in the 1900s, we'd know this, right? Archaeological evidence all supports the works of the New Testament. There is nothing in archaeology that refutes at all. All to refutes our knowledge of the life of Christ or any other person described in the writings. Matter of fact, the longer we do in archaeology, what did they just find? They found a ring with Pilate's name on it. They found a subscription with Pilate on it. They found all kinds of stuff.
I think in the amphitheater of Jerusalem, there's a stone engraved with Pilate's name as well. It's been around for a long time.
Look, I want to see all the curses to Pilate. You know what Pilate did? Look, there's all this good stuff that we should learn about, right? When we were kids, they never taught us this really cool stuff. Pilate pilfered the temple's treasury to build an aqueduct. He thought the people would like fresh water more than they were worried about their temple, right? It caused him a problem. It cost him, because of the insurrection that Pilate caused, Pilate caused a bunch of insurrections. He caused a lot of problems. That guy never seemed to learn. I don't know. He was a classic politician. I know what's best for you, so I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to take your money and build you an aqueduct. Even though it's free. And it's free. It's all free. It's just like the free test you're going to get for COVID. It's all free, but who's paying for it? It's free. Don't worry. It's free, right? So I'm pulling out the treasury and I'm going to build you an aqueduct. And he did. And the people got so irritated at Herod, or at Pilate, that they wrote letters. We know there were letters to the Senate, and the Senate eventually said,
You're going to Gaul.
You're going, baby. And Gaul is not, okay, Gaul, today Gaul is like, that's the Mediterranean in French. But, it must have been hotter or colder, who knows? In those days, it was not a happy place to be. Whatever. Anyway, it cracks me up. Archaeology is showing it. So, external comparisons of the New Testament works generally show no disagreement. You'll hear this all the time. I'll try to pass this on to you. But you hear this all the time. Mark and Luke apparently at odds in a number of events. Both pass the bibliographical and internal and external proofs. Luke would be considered less reliable based on being a secondary source, right? Secondary source because it's history. The genealogy of Christ, the Sermon on the Mountain, based on the test, they should be considered irrefutable. I think I got a couple of notes here for this. Okay, in the genealogy of Christ, Matthew gets genealogy, and this is a quote from, if you recognize it, this is Stein's Jewish New Testament. This is his commentary on the Jewish New Testament. This is what Stein says. Stein is a Jewish guy, a Messianic Jew. Matthew gives the genealogy of Joseph, who, though not Jesus' physical father, was regarded as a father by people generally, while Luke gives the genealogy of Yeshua through his mother Mary, the daughter of Eli. And so Yeshua is of Eli in the sense of being his grandson, while Yeshua's relationship with Joseph is portrayed in the word son as opposed, implying not actually. The big deal is that, okay, the Jewishness is conferred through the mother, not the father, in Jewish heritage, Jewish whatever, law. So it's very interesting. This is a very important point, I think. But one of the first things that you'll hear, your kids will hear, they go to college, or you'll hear if you go to college, hey, Luke and Matthew couldn't even get the genealogies right. They were so backwards, so stupid, they didn't get them right. They didn't know, so obviously it's false, right? False. That's what they'll say. Sermon on the Mount, Luke and Matthew describe different presentations in similar sermons. All right, anybody heard the same pastor say the same sermon, but at a different church, different place? Yeah, over and over again, right? Oh, please, I don't want to hear that one again. I heard that one 5 times. Just saying, okay. Matter of fact, a lot in the old days, pastors did what? They wrote down their sermons and they read them to you. Here is my famous Christmas sermon. I've given it for the last 50 years. Are you ready? Get ready. Right? Matthew and Luke are results of literary play. Okay, this is a Tübingen school view. Tübingen school view. See the top? Tübingen school. It actually should be umlaut on the Tübingen, but I don't put the umlaut because it's hard. It was hard to find when I was putting this together. Matthew and Luke are results of literary plagiarism where the unknown authors fuse the as yet undiscovered Q gospel and an unknown sayings gospel or Mark. Remember I talked about synoptic gospels in the first class? They are bogus. There is no such thing as a synoptic gospel. I'm sorry. The church, that came from Tübingen school. The church has accepted that. They've totally accepted this totally false and fallacious view. Even the idea of synoptic gospel, in other words, the idea that the 3 gospels came from a single source, what does that do to the evidentiary history? It ruins it. If there's one source in 3 documents, that means the other documents are just fakes, right? They're just, somebody made them up. So to hold by the Tübingen school and the view of synoptic gospels is not Greek, and I'm not going to be able to get into the Greek literature.
But they haven't even discovered it yet.
Of course not, they never will discover it. It's a magical, mystical thing that was invented by Tübingen because they couldn't find it, right? Because even you guys, how many of you think that the New Testament was originally written in Aramaic? You've been in my classes too long. It obviously can't be in Aramaic, had to be written in Greek, had to be written in Greek. There's no way they would quote Aramaic in a Greek document. If it was in Aramaic, that's crazy head stuff, right? It has to be in Greek. But you ask 9% of people that come out of a theological seminary, what was the original language of Jesus and what was the original language of the Gospels, and they will tell you Aramaic. And I'm like, okay, really, that's an interesting thing. This was their method to resolve the obvious parallels between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but no Q has ever been found unless you believe early church conspired to destroy every trace. You know, that's what's his name? Brown. Brown said, yes, the church conspired to destroy the early documents so that we'll never know, right? Obvious rejection of legal historical concept. Yeah, in this study we looked at Q later. Q is kind of funny. I have some fake copies of Q. Okay, so here's our conclusion. Based on a legal historical test, we conclude that the written words of all the books in the New Testament are historical fact. In those cases, primary source historical fact. There's no reason to doubt their historical actually veracity or authenticity. You don't have to believe this. This isn't belief. You see what I'm saying? You have to use a function of belief to believe Josephus or Irenaeus or even some of the other stuff. Irenaeus. We got some good documents from them. But I'm just saying, you have to have a function of belief to believe a lot of stuff, but it ain't about the New Testament. So when you tell your kids, when you read the New Testament, it's fact. It's historical fact. It's proven historical fact. You don't got to believe. to accept the historical actually veracity or authority. Belief is necessary to accept the spiritual import, however. Right? But the death and resurrection of Christ, Christ really no kidding died. He really no kidding resurrected. He was no kidding born of a virgin. He was no kidding did these miraculous things. There's evidence. People saw it, wrote it down. First person sources. And that's what we're going to look at in John, is the first person sources of that document. Like I said, belief is necessary. But this, in this class, this is your homework. Do what you want with that. What we really care about is history, culture, and language. We want to know what the documents really say. We want to know what their historical importance is. But the presumption is that they are historical, viable, and accurate. Okay? And like I said, you don't have to believe. As a matter, there is no word for believe in Greek. We'll learn about that too. So in any case, I'm going to transition. Let's see. I think that's about it. All right. And let's start talking about the literature of John. Let's see, and I don't know if I can get this up on the screen. Oh, yeah. That's good enough. Okay. So, perhaps the most important word that we will see used in all of the New Testament documents is this one right here. Lego. Let me tell you flat out, this is probably the most mistranslated word in your New Testament. I am really, well, that in pieces. Pieces pisteo. Lego is completely mistranslated. It does not mean word. Logos is not word. Lego is not word. When we look, we'll look at the document. We'll look at John, what it says. Because remember, the most famous began of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, and the word they use is Lego. Lego specifically. Lego means to lay forth, relate in words, usually of systematic or set discourse. And you notice here's the translations that they use in the King James. Logos from Lego. Lego literally means the best way of saying this is Lego is to systematic discourse. We would say a systematic discourse is if you and I are speaking about subjects that we're talking about in class, that's systematic discourse. That is Lego. Now, what you missed is I didn't have time to go over the other words. The words of the day, I had 12 words in Greek for say and said that are translated say and said in the New Testament. The problem is that in Greek it's very specific about its word usage. I'll need to go back and we'll review some of that, but I'm not going to do that right now. The big deal with the Greek, though, is that when you see it say, he legoed, it means it's systematic discourse. When you see it said, lay low is many times translated preaching, but lay low in Greek means to just talk. So I say, hey, Paul, how are you doing today? Is everything cool? How's the weather? How's your wife? How's life? That is lay low. On the other hand, if we are talking about, hey, in class, did you understand this concept, that we're talking about? What do you think about it? That's Lego. And the Greeks tell you when they are lay-lowing you and when they are Legoing you. They also tell you when they're giving you their opinion. Opinion is phemi. So if I'm going to tell you my opinion, in Greek it would say, here's my phemi. And it'll tell you right there in the text. The phemi is opinion. It's not systematic discourse. It's not just talking. There's Remy. Remy means I'm telling you a story. So if I tell you I'm going to Remy, it's not my opinion. It's not systematic discourse. I'm telling you a story. And that story could be fiction, it could be fact, it doesn't matter. It's not my opinion, it's a story. Usually a story is something that I'm relating to you that I saw or heard, right? And you see how that's different than a systematic discourse. Now, Lego means systematic discourse. Logos means words spoken with logic, truth, to lay out an argument in words, logical words. This is directly out of Vines and Strong's, okay? Vines is a better source in my opinion, but Strong's has similar stuff. So logos is not a word. It can't be translated word. It means words spoken with logic. And in Greek, logic to Greek, that's what we're going to talk about, logos to tell us, to lay out an argument. So in other words, and I'll give you a precursor, when it says, in the beginning was the logical argument. And the logical argument was with God. And God spoke the logical argument, right, and created. So Jesus is called the logical argument. Now I'm going to digress for just a second. The reason this is important is because in the Septuagint says, in the beginning was Theos. And the hagiopneuma of Theos, the hagiopneuma laid over the waters. And God Logos. God spoke the logical argument of creation. In the Hebrew, it says, in the beginning, Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim. Elohim means gods. I guess put capital. Elohim, and it uses a singular verb. Gods with a singular verb. And the ruach, that's close. Ruach of Elohim was on the surface of the waters, was over the waters. And Elohim Amard. Amard, remember from the Torah, this was a long time ago, like 2 years ago, whatever. Amard, Elohim Amard. This is the command word. This is translated hagios pneuma. This word is translated logos in the Septuagint. And this word is translated God. Why is this important? Because the New Old Testament is already pointing to the triune nature of God, mentions the three parts of God in the very beginning, and uses the term, which I think is really interesting. The Amar is a command word. In other words, in Hebrew it means a command. The rabbis in the Septuagint, and by the way, our buddy John, said that it was a logical argument. And what's really important about this, is, remember, it's a systematic discourse. What was who was having the discourse? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? I mean, they're not three, they're three in one. And remember, okay, C.S. Lewis, a four-dimensional God projected in three dimensions, has three beings. So they're not arguing about each other, they're in total agreement, but they use a logical argument to create. And by the way, how many want to disagree that the world is not a logical argument and the creation was not a logical argument? I mean, the rationality, we're still trying to figure out how rational it is, right? I mean, it was really funny because what's his name, got whacked mentally about it. Einstein. Einstein did not like the idea that God used probability theory But yeah, probability theory is a pure mathematic idea, and it's really cool. When I was in college, we were using Heisenberg to project atoms. And I don't know if this was the first time they used probability math in computational stuff. This is way back in the old days, with UNIVAC computers. And what was really cool is they used Heisenberg equation to spot the electron. And the electron is probability of electron is high that it's going to be found in a certain shell distance from it, but it can be found anywhere. And so when they did a plot, and it took them like, I think, a week to do this plot. It took them forever to do this plot. But the Heisenberg equation was calculating this plot forever to plot it. And you saw, here's the nucleus, right? And then here's the shell. And the thing was that they opened the shell up so you could see where the probability of the electron was. And the probability was it was projected to have a high probability, very high probability, like 90-something, 99, of being within this sphere around it. And you could see it plotted. And when I was in college, that was so cool. First of all, to see a computer actually doing something worthwhile. And second of all, seeing something so amazing being printed on paper. I wish I had a print of that. I think they were so valuable because it took a week to print these things. Anyway, they were trying to get the hydrogen atom to do the same thing and see if they could do it, but they didn't have the mathematical capability.
Wouldn't a mathematical equation or formula be considered a logical argument, basically?
I argue that, as a matter of fact, remember, one of the three ways to know truth by the Greeks is logic, logos, logical argument, right? And they, math is not scientific method. Math is not supported by scientific method. Why? Anybody know? Offhand? It's repeatable, but it's not like scientific method. In other words, if I took a ball and bounced it, I would get a different number every time. Math is not that way. It gives you a fixed number every time. So it's not scientific method. It is repeatable, but it is not changeable. And it's not historical legal method either. So math is logic and falls completely in the logical sphere. It's not related to the physical at all. And we can prove that. It's called set theory. Anyway, so the basis for this, for logic, for logos, comes from this whole point. And yes, mathematics and the whole society of the Greeks was based in mathematics. And that's where we're going with this. So what I'm going to do is maybe I'll give you some more information, so I'll make a new one because I love Steve Anderson. He would complain, though, if I ever repeated him. So I'll see if I can gen up some more information for you. But we'll basically look at the literature of John, because part of the most important thing about understanding a Greek document is you got to understand the Greek way of thinking and about the Greek writing. So if you don't understand that, it's going to make it really difficult. It's going to make it like reading a translation in English without understanding what the Greek is underneath. Oh, wow, that seems like a problem, right? Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray you look after this week. In your name we pray.
No class next week.
No class next week, yes. Oh, and Brett left. He should probably mark it. No class next week.
This March.
Yeah, mark them, Lord.